Hi, I'm Jay, welcome to the workshop, and today we're going to be talking about oil coolers. So today we're going to cover two main parts, mainly why install a auxiliary oil cooler and what parts do you need to be able to install one. So first of all, why am I doing it? Now, oil coolers can be used to cool any type of oil that's in your engine. It's more common in motorsport applications for the engine oil, for example, as due to increased stresses and spending most of the time in the higher RPM range, the engine oil can get quite hot. But that's not really our problem. As you probably know, our Hilux is a automatic, so it obviously has a automatic transmission, which means it has automatic transmission oil. Now, a few times when we've been doing, for example, we did a couple of high passes in the Lake District, and we also did the Applecross Pass in the north while doing the North Coast 500, which is quite a well-known pass for being quite steep, lots of switchbacks, lots of passing places, you're constantly starting and stopping. And with the weight in the Hilux, we found that at certain points we're actually stressing our automatic transmission oil to the point where the automatic transmission temperature warning light came on. Now, I found out that comes on about 120 degrees. By that point, your oil is pretty much damaged and needs to be replaced from then. So basically we want to avoid that 120 degree range. Now the stock cooler in the Hilux is in the bottom of the rad and uses the actual coolant from the engine to kind of cool a matrix which the transmission oil passes through. A couple of problems with that. Even though I've never heard of a Hilux suffering with this problem, there is a possibility of if the matrix breaks down and it develops a leak, you could potentially get engine coolant in your auto box, which is obviously not very good. It turns it into a emulsified mess and messes with all the very intricate parts and solenoids and little ports and all that kind of thing inside your automatic transmission. Colorados apparently are quite prone to that, so this is quite a common modification on that as well. Second of all, they kind of, even though the engine coolant helps warm up the automatic transmission oil, it can go vice versa. So if your engine coolant gets quite hot for whatever reason, that can also affect your automatic transmission temperatures as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to completely bypass the factory system, and we're going to install a auxiliary radiator in front of the main radiator, which should hopefully keep the two separate systems apart and keep them both at their optimum operating temperatures. Now, that was briefly why we're installing one. So let's go through the parts that we have bought to be able to install one. So I've had a quick look through this box just to make sure everything's here, but other than that, I haven't really opened it. So the first component obviously is the auxiliary radiator. Obviously the oil flows through this and gets cooled by convection, just like your normal engine engine coolant radiator would do. So we've gone with a C-Trab Pro Line Edition. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. As you can see, it's a very small radiator, mainly because you don't want a massive radiator because you might have problems with the oil not coming up to temperature, but you also don't want too of a dinky one as well, because that can possibly not be a good enough cooling solution. So this is quite a thick one, 16 matrix by I think it's 230mm long, and we're going to mount that in this orientation on the fan side of the radiator because the fan is offset. So we're going to put it basically where the fan is. So the fan's drawing air through this radiator. We do have the option of putting an electric fan on here if for whatever reason this is not big enough, or we can just go to a bigger radiator. So yeah, that's the main component of the system, but obviously we need to be able to plumb it up. So thankfully enough, the Hilux's Autobox cooling system just uses push-on fittings. So I've got an extra length of tubing, which is the same inside diameter of the Hilux stuff. That is a proper oil/fuel hose, which means it's not going to break down, and it's also reinforced. I've also got all the relative fittings. These are JIC fittings, hydraulic fittings. I've got a bunch of them which push straight on. If I can get the packet open. I've got a bunch of these little small things which convert a 3/8 push-on fitting to a 6 JIC hydraulic fitting, which is the standard used in the automotive industry. So that means all these fittings that I've got will comply with each other. I've also got the M22 adapter. That the thread in the radiator is M22, which goes to 6 JIC. I'm going to have to order another one because I thought they came in pairs. Apparently they don't, so that's one thing to think of. I've also got a bunch of good quality hose clips to make sure the pipe doesn't get blown off the end, and I've also got these little male-to-male adapters with a 1/8 MPT thread in them. Now why have I got that? Mainly because I want to be able to monitor the temperature of the oil, and not so critically but the pressure. So if I spring a leak and I see the pressure drop, for example, I know to stop immediately. Also the temperature means that I can preempt pulling over and letting the oil cool down rather than relying on the warning light comes on, which I said before comes on 120 degrees. By that point damage is already starting to be done. So if it starts creeping up from, I think 80 is around about its operating temperature, so it starts creeping up to the hundreds, I know I need to pull over and let it cool down. So to do that, I've obviously got the housing there, but I've also got an SPA Signature Series dual display gauge. I'll probably do a separate video on this because it is a very detailed gauge, but essentially it's a, if I can get this out, so essentially it's a 52mm gauge which digitally displays PSI and oil temperature, but it also allows you to program custom warnings, different backlight displays. It even has an output to be able to activate relays and as such. So if you could use this to control an electric fan on the radiator cowling, for example. So yeah, it's a very good quality gauge, and as it was potentially saving me £1,000, £2,000, £3,000 replacement gearbox bill, it was worth spending the extra little bit of cash to make sure I'm getting an accurate reading. And finally, something simple, a pod holder to hold the gauge, which I'm not sure if I'm going to use that yet. I haven't quite figured out where the gauge is going to go. So that's all the parts. That's all the parts you need. Basically, to install it, what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to take the front end of the Hilux apart because there's not a lot of room behind that grille there, and figure out a way of mounting it. So keep an eye out for that video, and I'll go through the mounting process and how I'm actually going to connect it up. But until then, I shall see you later.